It's time to talk Jacksonville Jaguars football on the Our Football Network. As free agency, even though deals cannot become official, or most of the deals cannot become official until Wednesday, this is an exciting time because the news is already trickling out that players and teams have reached agreements. And our guest today just so happens to be on one of those teams. Matter of fact, he's the senior writer for the Jacksonville Jaguars. You can catch his articles on covering the team at jaguars.com. John Oehser. John, good to have you back again.
Very good, very good. It's a busy time here, and we'll try to get people caught up.
Yes, absolutely. Let's do that. And I tell you what, let's start with the offensive line because before today, we knew the one move they made was to retag Cam Robinson. And now they've gone out and they've signed Brandon Scherf, one of the top, if not the top offensive interior linemen available on the market. So what does that do right now for the rest of how the Jags, you believe, will set up their offensive line for 2022?
Well, it makes perfect sense. Andrew Norwell, who'd been a 4-year starter after signing from Carolina in 18, was unrestricted. So you felt like there was going to be a hole there. It can be tough sometimes to plug in a drafted player on the interior and expect him to be at a high level immediately. So it looks like you will have Scherf at left guard, Brandon Leonard at center. At right guard, Ben Bartch, who they drafted in 20. And then Cam Robinson on the left side at tackle. And either Walker Little or Jawan Taylor on the right side. Walker Little, second-round pick, who played a little for Cam last year. He was a second-round pick in 2021. And then Jawan Taylor, a second-round pick in 2019. So they've got some options. It looks like they've actually been a fairly deep offensive line the last couple of years. It looks like they will have some depth again. You're either going to have Walker Little or Jawan Taylor as your backup tackle. You'll take that. So, and then Tyler Shatley has been the backup on the interior, who's a good backup. So, pretty good 7 right now for this team.
Did you say that Bartch is the starting right guard?
Yes.
Okay, just wanted to double check.
He started, just for clarification, A.J. Cann entered last year as a starter and then was hurt in week 4.
Okay.
And then Bartch started the last 13 games, was fine, better than fine, it was pretty good. So the anticipation is that he would remain the starter going into 2022.
Okay, and right now, Shatley would be the top interior lineman as of right now, unless they re-sign. I mean, Cann is still a free agent as well as Richardson and Norwell, correct?
Correct. So, and it's just operating on the assumption that with Scherf you wouldn't bring back Norwell, and then Cann, salary-wise, you would expect Ben Bartch, who started, now he's on his third year, still on a rookie contract. He played fine. You would anticipate that would be their setup.
Okay.
I would anticipate AJ being back, but we'll see.
And at this point in time, you think they're done now? You think that's it? The offensive line is pretty set?
You would guess on the front line, yes, because of so many needs. Brandon Linder is in the final year of his contract, no dead money. Theoretically, you could move on from him, but Brandon Linder is a good player with only really injuries that have stood in his way the last few years. So not anticipating not anticipating a move there is what I'm getting.
Okay, sure. All right, now let's talk about the other moves that were made. First of all, on the defensive line, and the kid out of the Jets, Fadokasi, the defensive tackle, who, as a Jet fan, has been a big player for them up front, in the middle, very good. Matter of fact, I believe he was, I know the 2020 season, he was right up there as one of the best interior run stuffers in the league. Still a very solid player in 2021, even though the Jets defense kind of suffered around him. But this is a big pickup as well.
Yeah, this team needed it. It was better against the run last year than it was in 2020 when it was bad against the run. But it has needed for a couple of years to be stouter on the interior, to be stouter up the middle, and to stop the run better without having to commit so many bodies to do it, without having to bring guys down in the box. This would be a move to encourage that. Again, they were okay last year. The hope with free agency, when you're doing it this early in free agency, is the guy makes you better than okay. So that's the move there. They feel like they have to get better on the interior of the defensive line and in the middle of the whole defense. That's what they're trying to do.
And with Gotsis and Bryan right now still free agents as of right today, correct?
Correct.
Do you think that they might just bring those guys back? Have you heard anything yet about whether or not this is not done yet? Whether or not they still need to upgrade up front?
Yeah, if either of them were to come back, I would anticipate Gotsis over Bryan. Taven was a first-round pick in 2018. Was inactive the last game of this last season. With a new staff, new regime, never say never. I don't believe the old staff would have brought him back. So we'll see.
Okay.
I mean, capable guy, but probably a backup at best at this point. Gotsis has been productive, has been good. Don't have a feel for how this regime feels, but he's certainly a guy that you would think second tier free agency. Oh, I hate that word, but second tier free agency. You would think that could be an option coming back, depending on what the market brings.
Okay. And what about the kid that they drafted in the 4th round last year? Do you think? Well, again, different regime, so not sure what the new guys think. But what is the kid's name? Tufele?
Yeah, Jay Tufele from Southern Cal. Played some games, nose tackle. I always hesitate to, when a nose tackle comes into the NFL and doesn't play a whole lot as a rookie.
Yeah.
Not a big concern to me because there's so much that has to be learned and has to get big enough to play the position. I assume that he's going to be a part of it. I assume with this move today that he'll be part of the rotation.
Okay. Now, the other move they made today on defense was bringing over the linebacker from Atlanta, and I'm sure there's going to be a lot of members of the media that are going to be a little concerned with this name. But Foye Oluwakin is coming over from the Atlanta Falcons, and he had a huge statistical season last year. The tackle numbers were way up. He's not one of those linebackers that you bring on to come up with big plays in the backfield or anything like that, but he seems to be like a system guy, a guy you can trust, very smart guy from Ivy League school.
Yeah, it certainly looks like it. I'm going to let you handle the name. I'm going to call him Foye O for this the purpose of this podcast.
Yeah.
I will try to get better before I meet him. But it certainly plays into what we talked about earlier on the interior of the defensive line. They needed to get better up the middle against the run. Damian Wilson, who played the position that you would assume that Foye O is going to play, he played fine last year, but this is a way to get a guy that you see as a 2 or 3 year guy. He'll play next to Miles Jack, you would assume, in a 3-4 defense. He has 5 interceptions, which shows you that he has ball awareness. Not a bad tackle for loss guy. Incredibly productive. I saw one stat, 192 tackles last year, led the league. At that spot, you make the argument that guy's supposed to do that. That's a lot of tackles. So they wanted to get better, more reliable, played 17 games. Again, this franchise has not been good for a couple of years. So as we talked about before we went on the air today, there's a process when that's the case of you need to make up for some past draft mistakes. These two guys, and including Scherf's a little different. Scherf's going after a premium guy. Two guys they signed on defense today, or are acquiring on defense, really feel like we've got to shore up our talent level across the front. We have to get good enough where it's not expected we're 3-14. They have to raise their talent, and these two guys did that.
Okay, now with the kind of moving over to the draft with these moves, because originally when you started thinking early in the process about what the Jags might be interested in doing, I think there was a couple of different ways you looked at it. You said, okay, if they don't make any free agent moves, you were thinking, well, maybe an offensive tackle could be the first guy. Maybe they go after the kid from NC State. Maybe they go after Neal. But then they tagged Robinson. Now they've made the move for Scherf. And then you take a look at the other position that you kind of felt that they were going to need help in, and that's edge rusher. And we were just talking about linebackers, but you have Josh Allen, and we know how he still has been productive. So he's still a big part of the organization, but Chason has not. So let's talk a little bit about Chason, and maybe the new regime will help him out. But what do you think now? Do you think that the moves over the last week or two will now shift Jacksonville's thought process if they were even considering the offensive line, or if we as analysts were considering that they would go with the offensive line, will now shift more towards an edge rusher with that first pick?
Feels like it. I mean, Aiden Hutchinson is considered the safest pick in the draft by a lot of people. Trent Baalke, the general manager here, historically has done well drafting edge rushers. Of course, Trent's not going to really tip his hand over who he likes at the top of the draft, but that feels like somebody that he would like. It strikes you as a year where, there's so many questions about some of these top guys. There's not really that guy that, okay, dead solid lock, this guy's going to be a 15-year All-Pro. I'm exaggerating that, but you know what I'm saying. It's not a elite All-Pro at the top of the draft necessarily that you can lock up. So if there were that, then to me, offensive line might be in play. If all these guys are sort of equal, then it makes more sense that you might go edge rusher because you've already, quote, shored up the offensive line with the offseason moves. They're not going to tip very much with that because I think they want to keep their options open. It strikes you from what Trent Baalke said at the Combine, trading down would be a cool thing for this team. Realistically, unless somebody catches fire, I don't have to tell you this, there doesn't feel like a guy that teams are going to come up and get.
Yeah.
And also, you've got 2 or 3 edge rushers that are a little interchangeable, 3 or 4 tackles who are a little interchangeable at the top. When that's the case, do teams have incentive to go up and get a guy?
Yeah.
I think the Jaguars hope so. I don't know that it feels like that's a year where you can do that.
Yeah, especially with no quarterback that is up there
Correct.
and available, especially when you have one. That would have been the big hope. Okay, but you think if they do go with an edge rusher, Hutchinson, in your mind, might make the most sense out of the other 3?
Feels like
the other
it.
2. Okay.
And again, that's only because when you read about these guys, it feels like in most analysts' mind that Hutchinson has sort of emerged as the guy over Thibodeau. Do the Jaguars feel that way? I don't know, but that's sort of how it feels in terms of reading the tea leaves.
Okay, Chason, what's not clicked so far with him since he's been with the team?
He's played okay as a run and chase linebacker. Hasn't really been a pass rush guy. So if you're looking to upgrade pass rusher, then it's not really an either or situation. It doesn't feel like he's got, I think, 1 sack in 2 years, and he hasn't been an elite edge rusher yet. Josh Allen has shown signs of that. So I don't think this team's writing off Chason, but it doesn't feel like if you're at the top of the draft and you're trying to get elite franchise difference-making guy, which is what you are, I don't think that's an either-or scenario. Even if they liked Chason, sure, I think he would have to be already showing as an 8 or 9 sack guy for them to think, okay, we don't need this special player on top of the draft. Yep. So to me, it's not necessarily an indictment on Chason as much as, okay, Hutchinson's probably the safest pick up there.
By the way, would they? You think they could turn right around? Because so far, what is their draft status as far as their stock? Do they have picks in every round early on? Do they have multiple picks? How does it look at this point?
They've got 12.
12.
The majority of the multiple rounds are late. There's 4 in the 6th and 2 in the 7th.
Okay.
So most of it's late. Their normal allotment holds 1 through I think 4.
Okay.
I haven't looked at it in a minute, but ish. I mean, it's 1 in the first, 1 in the second, and I think 2 in the third because of the Ngakoue trade.
Okay.
So it feels like unless something happens bold with free agency, and even if it does, this team's got to get better at receiver. Number 33 overall feels like a sweet spot this year for receiver because there's not really a top 10 guy, but everything you read is that there are a bunch of really good players. I would be very surprised if the Jaguars don't go receiver at number 33.
Okay.
I've been surprised before, but that's sort of what it feels like. At some point, they've got to get their receiving core. I think they need a 1. I think they feel like they need an eventual 1. Everything you hear is that, top of the second round is not absurd to think you can get that.
No, matter of fact, I mean, Jamison Williams was the only wide receiver that we all suspected the way he was playing. He was going to be the top 10 guy. Then he gets hurt. Now, nobody knows. Will somebody take a chance with him in the 20s? Or will he slip into the second round? Do you think, because Jacksonville's in a rebuild, that they would okay, we'll take a guy that's coming off a serious injury, even though we know the upside's tremendous?
Yeah, it's hard to say. I mean, I would hope they would, and I think some fans hear that and say, "Oh, why would you want a guy who's not going to contribute the first 8 games or whatever that number is going to be?" But if he's special, and there's really no reason to think anymore, if a guy has an ACL at 28, okay, maybe you're concerned about it. Guy has an ACL at this kid's age, you can come back from that, and there's enough cases where it happens. My sense is Peterson and Balky, Doug Peterson, the new head coach, they have an eye on the long term. You obviously prefer immediate impact, but I would not rule that out.
Okay.
I mean, this is a pretty, long-term, big picture. Listen to Trent Balky. He's about value. He's about long-term. I think that has to be considered. Yeah, I can't say whether they would do it, but I wouldn't call it off the table.
Speaking of injured receivers, is that it for DJ Shark in Jacksonville?
I hope not, because I like DJ. It's a tricky situation. He was a 2019 Pro Bowler, obviously has the skills to be a very productive player, hasn't been that productive in the last couple of years. So from a front office point of view, you're trying to figure out what you've seen since you've been here, and what the ability is. I think DJ Chark's going to be a better player year 5 through 8 than he was year 1 through 4.
Yes.
He has the ability to do that, but realistically, once it gets to this point in free agency and guys start getting offers, reeling them back, as you know, is relatively rare when they're high profile. So I hope I'm wrong. It feels like DJ may be leaving.
Okay, staying on offense at running back, I know the history of Doug Peterson is he likes to have a stable of running backs. And Jacksonville's already off to a pretty good start with a couple of players, including Robinson, and then they get Etienne back. Do you think that is still a position, especially with all their picks, and you can go late in the draft and find some really good running backs at any time? So you still think they're going to add at least another running back, either in free agency or the draft, that will be a key contributor?
It's so tough, and I'm not trying to dodge the question. Etienne had a list Frank missed all last year. James Robinson had an Achilles tear in December. To me, it's all, what do the doctors tell him about the health of these two guys? If those two guys are 100%, which perhaps they will be, then I think it's a minimal need that you can address late in the draft. If they're getting information that either of those guys aren't, then it's different. So it's a need with an asterisk, I guess, being a point. They certainly need to be better at running back than they were last year, with the exception of Robinson. Etienne's the big X factor there. So I think they'll address it somewhere. I'm just not sure where.
Okay, and then as big as the need is at wide receiver over running back, if they believe that there's just too much uncertainty in that backfield, would you be surprised if say, Brees Hall, who had a tremendous combine and was going to probably be the top running back in the class anyway. Now he's clearly the top running back in the class. If he were to be available in round 2, do you think that if they don't think that they've got the right, or maybe they trade back a little bit and they still can get a Brees Hall and get their wide receiver, do you think that they would consider that?
Round 2 would surprise me, only because, you can get that position other places, and I know running backs hate hearing that, but that's sort of the reality of it. There's so many places to address that it's hard to see running back in round 2.
Okay. And then finally, the secondary. And take a look here. They traded Henderson last year. So at the top of the list is Shaquille Griffin. And then you have the kid that was drafted last year in the second round, Tyson Campbell. So are they at this point looking for that third corner, and how important would that third corner be? What do you think they address that in more than likely free agency or the draft?
Yeah, it feels like that's pretty important. They originally drafted Tyson, I think, to be a nickel, but C.J. Henderson gets traded. So it feels to me, Tyson Campbell, by the way, played really, really well last year. Looks like if he's not a one corner, he's pretty close.
Okay.
So, I hesitate to say he is that, but I'm sure not ruling it out.
Okay.
And Shaq Griffin, he had some dropped interceptions last year and didn't get one, but he had his hands on a lot of balls. So he's playing good defense. To me, with corner, your first job is to keep the other guy from catching it. Down on the list is actually getting a pick. So those two corners are pretty good. I would say that getting a nickel is very important. What I'm not sure of, and this is because I just haven't asked them yet, nickel to me, a lot of times you want a veteran in there because it's a trickier position to learn than your outside corners. Do they want a semi 1A tier guy there, or are they content with having a rookie come along and play that spot?
Okay.
I don't quite know their philosophy on that, but I would not be surprised to see nickel in sort of your second wave of free agency. And again, Gray, that's one of those, as you know, you can do both with that spot, meaning you can address it in free agency and you can address it in the draft, because at worst case, they're probably going to get on the field, and they're huge on special teams. So the depth chart there doesn't necessarily preclude you from addressing it in both areas the way maybe it would on the offensive line where not everybody's playing.
Yeah, I think maybe one of the top corners I saw that was a slot guy is Casey Hayward. I think he's available.
Yeah.
But he played with the Raiders last year, right?
Surprise you. I hate to predict it because nickel's just not one of those things that gets discussed that much, although it should because it's really a starter now. So I'd be a little surprised if they don't sort of address it with more than one guy. Okay. Because, again, this is a team that really didn't have a very good roster last year. So they've got to get guys at each spot. If their worst case scenario is they draft a third round corner who's their fourth guy the first year and can play special teams, I think they would take that if they feel like they're making their roster better. Okay,
and then at safety, this is actually a spot on this team that doesn't look all too bad. You got Wingard, who's a restricted free agent still, Jenkins, and of course Cisco, who's just got to get on the playing field. So is that pretty much the way you see the safeties, trio looking again in 2022?
Yeah, I could say, that's a tough one to analyze. Wingard, he's a restricted guy. They offered him a tender, so they have right of first refusal on him. Cisco looked like he was coming along, played well in 2 or 3 games at the end of last year, only played 3 games. I'm assuming he's going to start at some point. Rayshawn Jenkins, bad injury midway through last year. No reason to think he can't come back. But what is unknown, they feel like they have a chance to be good there. Do they want to get better there? Do they want to be impact difference making guy there? They haven't really shown either of those guys yet. They can do it. What's sometimes difficult to know with this regime. Trent Baalke was a GM last year, but Urban Meyer had so much say in what went on.
Yeah.
Does Trent love the guys they acquired last offseason? I don't know that. I don't know that either way, but that's why I'm not really ruling out somewhere at safety. Could they be trying to upgrade? It doesn't feel absolutely set in stone, but they're in a good situation because they're not bad there if they go forward. So,
and Cisco has a lot of upside.
Yeah, I guess what sort of colors the analysis on a lot of these. When you're 3-14,
yeah,
and really, barely that, quite frankly, then you got to relook at all positions and say, even though we have starters there, are we good enough? That's just not specific to safety, Greg. That's every position they've got to look at and say, look, are our starters where we want them to be? I think the next few weeks will play that out on some of those decisions. They haven't been discussed quite as much. Safety hasn't been discussed quite as much, but I don't feel like it's a closed door.
Yeah, that's why I tend myself not to get too caught up on mock drafts until after free agency begins, because it changes everything.
Yeah.
And even when I have to put our lads draft guide together, and the Jacksonville has been one of my 11 teams each year, and we have a small window between when it has to go to print and when we got to kind of start putting it together. It's like I can't put almost any of it together until at least I get so instead of having like a month to put I really have a week, because I can't really do anything until free agency starts.
Even though, Greg, the smart teams shouldn't affect that much because you should be drafting best available, right?
Yeah, and unfortunately I have a lot of the other teams.
Sure.
I just happen to have like 90% of the teams that are in like the top 15 of the draft every year, so which I guess is fun. But it's a headache. Okay, so in closing, would we then say it's still looking like at this point we're going to lean towards edge rusher with the top pick, but we're not going to rule out offensive tackle because you just never know. And the second pick definitely looks like a wide receiver.
Yeah, and that's what it feels like based on conventional wisdom about the draft. Do they like Kyle Hamilton enough to sort of break the bank and say, okay, we're taking a safety one? That's so out there in terms of draft thinking that I'm not going there.
Sure.
But it's a year where it sort of feels like, if any year that could happen, it sort of feels like it happened because Kyle Hamilton is so highly rated by some people. But if you're going by the book, which we have to sort of do, the fact that they they have re-signed and they look like they have three guys who can play tackle in Jawan Taylor, Little, and Robinson. To me, that'll say something pretty heavy about how much they like one of those tackles if they draft with that already in the building. But the X factor there, Greg, obviously is Cam's on a one-year deal.
That's true.
As a franchise guy.
Yes.
So there's always the school of thought that you can bring in a Neal or even an Icky, put him at guard for a year, the way the Ravens did Ogden back in the day.
That's right.
And then move him out to left tackle.
Yep.
Again, when they discuss these things, they're going to discuss all these things we can do because they don't want to tip their hand. That's an option that makes that left tackle make a little more sense for somebody who's trying to analyze it.
And I doubt. I mean, so lastly, if they had their biggest free agent signing, what do you think that's going to end up being?
Well, I haven't seen the numbers.
Do you think we've done that already?
Scherf would certainly a candidate, 5-time Pro Bowler, and make an argument that he's, is there a more decorated guy in this free agent class? Maybe not. He's up there. That's a pretty former All-Pro. I don't know that there's a receiver that's going to be perceived as big enough to knock that off.
You had
So
one of them.
my guess is maybe Sherman.
I said
What's
you
that?
had one of them a few years ago.
Yeah.
By the way,
So
what do you think about
it's
Allen Robinson? Because he's very hard to figure out, because you wonder whether or not, is it all about the talent around him? Or, are you getting into a situation where you're going to be paying for a guy that hasn't really produced much the last few years?
Yeah, I don't know enough about his situation in Chicago just because I'm not
Sure.
there. I do know that if if you know what you're getting in A-Rob and you want to use that, you're getting a really, really good player. Meaning, I don't know that he's going to be, he can get deep. He gets deep because he's a good route runner, and such a threat that he can get himself deep. But he's not a burner.
Sure.
So if you're expecting a burner, you're not going to get that. If you want a guy who's really reliable and a really good teammate and really going to win high point, he's going to win 50-50 balls, good red zone. I love Allen Robinson as a player. I love Allen Robinson as a person. I'd love to see him back. I like him, having covered him for 4 years. I think it'd be a great signing for whatever team gets him. Is he Devontae Adams? His career hasn't shown that.
Not that he's played with Aaron Rodgers, though.
I don't think you're going to. Well, I would say this with free agency. I've been doing this for so long that if I was a GM, free agency would really scare me. There's so much bad money spent. You don't know what you're getting. I feel like you know what you're getting in Allen Robinson, and you're pretty sure that you're going to get what you pay for, or what your expectation is, as long as you pay what you want to pay and make that commitment. And you're going to make, hey, he's not going to bust. And I've seen too many bust where I like a free agent who I know is not going to bust.
And that's good to know. That's why I wanted to ask the question, because it is hard to know if you don't know a lot about, like you just talked about, the individual himself and what else is he going to bring to the table. Because when you look at the stats, you tend to think, well, is it all the team's fault that he's playing with? Is it all those quarterbacks' faults that he's playing with? Or is this guy going to wind up being an overpriced free agent, one of those guys you just talked about? So it is.
I could say this. In 2017, the 1 year the Jaguars have been good, and they lost the Patriots in the AFC Championship game. A-Rob got hurt. He had one catch and tore his ACL stepping out of bounds in the first game of the season. I've always believed, had he played, they go to the Super Bowl. So, and that's not saying very much. They were about 4 minutes away from doing it. But late in that game, the Jaguars didn't feel like they could throw. Their offense wasn't reliable. Not having him there, that's the year that he really would have pushed this team over the top. Who knows what happens? Again, I don't know how much that says about what you need for him now. But I just know the way the guy works, the way the guy approaches it. He's very consistent. I'd be surprised if he's not productive with a functioning offense.
John, great job. I appreciate it. I look forward to talking to you again when the draft is over. And before, I got to put that review report together, and we can talk about how the offseason went for Jacksonville. It'll be here before we know it.
Absolutely. Always enjoy it,
Thanks.
Greg.
John Oehser, covering the Jacksonville Jaguars at Jaguars.com. We'll see you next time here on the Our Lads Football Network.